I grew up in churches that didn't really observe the Christian year per se. I mean, we certainly celebrated Christmas and Easter, and I think we lit Advent candles maybe, but certainly there was no sense of the rhythm of Lent, for example, which we've just been through. But I think the thing I most appreciate about learning about, paying attention a little more, trying to live a little more into the Christian year is that realizing that Easter is not just one Sunday, but there's an entire season of Easter. We have 40 days of Lent, but we have 50 days of Easter between Easter Sunday and Pentecost. And so while Easter Sunday was last week, we are still celebrating Easter, and we get to celebrate that life that we have in God through Jesus for a very long time. It's an entire season, and I am grateful for it. I'm also grateful for the narrative lectionary that we've been following that has taken us through Luke's gospel, hearing, seeing, reading Jesus' story from the perspective of this one writer. Today is our last day in the Gospel of Luke for this cycle of the narrative lectionary. There's just a little more of Luke after the story that we hear today. So if you haven't already, I do encourage you to just finish up the book of Luke. It's not much beyond the story of the Emmaus Road. But today, that's the story that we're focused on. And it's the last story we'll read from Luke, the story of these travelers on the road to Emmaus. It's one of my favorite stories, and it is really, really rich with all kinds of insights and revelations about God. And this week, I just couldn't settle in. I couldn't figure out what road I wanted to travel through this story to share with you. So rather than a more traditional kind of sermon, I have short reflections on 3 different themes that pop up in this story. Reflections on the road, reflections on the table, and reflections on community. And after each reflection, there's a couple questions for you to consider and a little bit of space to think about those questions before we move on to the next reflection. So it's a little different format, but I hope that you find this a meaningful way to enter into this scripture and this story of Jesus' resurrection appearance as we finish up our time in Luke's gospel for now. One of the insights that we have from this story is an insight about traveling, about being on the road, walking the path. You might have noticed a whole lot of traveling in Luke's gospel. 10 chapters of the gospel are about Jesus traveling to Jerusalem. And when we get to the book of Acts, which is also written by the same person, there are a lot of important roads there, like the road to Damascus, right? So traveling is an important theme in Luke, and this story, which is towards the very end of Luke's gospel, highlights the importance of travel. There's so much that happens on the road. There's grieving, and there's a lot of learning as Jesus explains the scriptures. And there's the chance that the travelers have to tell the story, to process their understanding of what has happened. And it's true that it's not until they get to their destination that they recognize Christ. But I have to wonder whether they would have been able to recognize him if they hadn't taken that journey, if they hadn't been traveling with him. And there are lots of ways that we can think about this in our own lives, the ways that we so often meet God on our way to a destination, right? We have a place in mind we think is the important place that we're wanting to get to, but significant things happen on the way. And in the life of our church, I've been thinking about our building project and how excited we were to get to the destination of having a beautiful worship space and classrooms. And don't get me wrong, I am super glad that we're there. There's a lot about that journey that was hard. There was also a lot about that journey that was really beautiful and wonderful. A lot of places that God showed up for us, a lot of places that we showed up for each other, that we strengthened our relationship, that we grew in our faith. The destination is good, the journey is also good. So I would encourage you to think about your own life. Where do you see yourself headed? And how might you see God? Where do you see God around you right now, wherever you are in the journey on the way? So the theme of eating meals, right? It's all over Luke's gospel. Jesus is always eating with people he shouldn't eat with. He goes to Zacchaeus' house. We have his time in Mary and Martha's home. Jesus himself provides food, feeding the 5,000. Meals are important in the Gospel of Luke. And when Jesus eats with people, it is a sharing at a deeper level than just sharing the food. Obviously, when Jesus, the language used here in Luke, that Jesus took the bread and broke it and gave it to them, is reminiscent both of the feeding of the 5,000 story and the Last Supper. And it's language that we still use today when we share in communion. I'm sitting at my kitchen table. It does not always look this fancy. I put the tablecloth on that we had when we hosted Easter, our Easter taco bar lunch on last Sunday. And fun story, when he was washing the tablecloth after the meal, Ryan realized that it's not actually a tablecloth. It is in fact a shower curtain. I don't know where I got it, garage sale, Goodwill, whatever, but I think it's beautiful and I will continue to use it on my table for the time being. But of course, we don't have to have a fancy table to share a meal with people, to offer hospitality. I don't know what kind of a meal the travelers were able to offer to Jesus. They've been away. They're probably hot and sweaty and tired by the time they get home. They've been through a really difficult time emotionally. They just walked 7 miles. So I imagine they weren't rolling out the red carpet. They weren't putting on a 5-course meal. They just recognized that the stranger that was with them needed a place to rest, needed some food to eat, and they were willing to offer that to him. And in offering that basic hospitality, in being willing to share a meal with them, their eyes were opened. They recognized that it was Jesus who was with them. And that is how it works so many times, that we recognize the presence of God in other people when we open up our lives to them to share even the most mundane of things. Sometimes we plan fancy feasts, but more often it's just simple acts of sharing life together, and we get glimpses of God in our midst. I invite you to think about times that you've experienced God in the presence of other people, and think about who in your life you might invite in to be part of a meal or a walk or a phone call, or some way to just get to know someone and see what God might show you through your relationship with them. The last insight I have today about the Emmaus story has to do with community. And here is our worship space where we used to gather as a faith community. You can see now I have this little table set up where I put my computer or set up my tripod and my phone to record sermons sometimes. But some of us were able to gather in person on Sunday out here for the Easter sunrise service, which was lovely. But mostly our community right now is meeting on the computer, on Zoom, watching videos. It's not what we're used to, but it is still community. And the Emmaus story shows how important that community is for followers of Jesus. I mean, these two travelers have just gotten to their destination. They're finally eating, relaxing after a really hard emotional time and a long walk. And as soon as they realize that it's been Jesus with them, they pop up and they run back to their community. They go back to the other disciples and share with them the good news and hear from them what they have heard and what they have seen. And that's the thing about community, a community of faith, that none of us has the full picture of who God is, of what Jesus calls us to, of how God is working in this world. But if we each bring the pieces that we do have to each other, then we are able to be more faithful together than we could possibly be on our own. And the other thing I love about this story and what it says about community is that this significant revelation of Jesus showing up to these two travelers, Jesus has come to people who are somewhat on the periphery. Because notice when the travelers go back, the disciples and many of the other followers, they're still there gathered in Jerusalem. There's some sort of a core group that's still there. These two travelers, while they are part of the community, they don't seem to be in that really central group. They left. They went on while others stayed back, yet they're received back into the center of the community, and they offer something really beautiful and valuable that others in the community would miss if they hadn't been willing to receive and to hear these people who were a little bit on the edge, to accept them into the middle of the community. So as we think about community, I invite you to consider what gifts you have received from your faith community or another community over these COVID months. And also think about what gifts you bring to the community. And we can give thanks together for these people of Peace Mennonite that God has called us to be community with.